Sarah Chun wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished checking the medical supplies in the emergency bay. The space station Harmony 7 orbited a beautiful blue planet called Xerion Prime, home to one of the galaxy's most ancient and proud species, the Draconic Confederacy. As the only human nurse aboard this particular station, Sarah had grown used to the suspicious looks and whispered comments from her alien colleagues. The Draconians were magnificent creatures, standing 12 feet tall when fully grown, with scales that shimmered like precious metals and eyes that burned with ancient intelligence. They commanded respect wherever they went. Their civilization had mastered space travel thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire. They viewed most younger species as children playing with dangerous toys. Humans, however, they saw as something worse. Violent, unpredictable, dangerous. Sarah had heard all the stories. How humans had allegedly started 3 different wars in the past century. How they solved problems with weapons instead of diplomacy. How they couldn't be trusted around anything fragile or valuable. The Galactic Council had only admitted humanity 20 years ago, and even then, it was with strict limitations. Humans could serve in medical roles, maintenance, and other safe positions, but they were banned from military service, diplomatic missions, or any role involving significant responsibility. The medical bay door chimed, and Dr. Vorthak, the chief medical officer, glided in. His bronze scales caught the light as he moved with the fluid grace all Draconians possessed. His yellow eyes fixed on Sarah with their usual expression of barely concealed distrust. "Nurse Chun," he said, his voice carrying the musical quality that made all Draconian speech sound like a song. "The supply transport from the surface will arrive in 2 hours. I want you to inventory everything they bring up. Every bandage, every medication, every piece of equipment. Humans have a reputation for misplacing things." Sarah nodded professionally. "Of course, Doctor. I'll make sure everything is accounted for." Vorthak's tail swished behind him, a sign of agitation among his people. "See that you do. The contents of that transport are worth more than your planet's annual medical budget. We cannot afford any of your species' characteristic carelessness." After he left, Sarah returned to her duties. She had learned long ago not to react to such comments. Getting angry would only prove their point about human volatility. Instead, she focused on being the best nurse she could be. Every patient she helped, every procedure she assisted with flawlessly, was a small victory against the prejudice she faced daily. The station's day cycle was artificial, but Sarah had grown used to its rhythm. She was just finishing her evening meal in the small human section of the cafeteria when the emergency alarms began blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors as the automated voice announced a code 3 emergency. Critical injury requiring immediate medical attention. Sarah rushed to the medical bay, her training taking over. She had barely arrived when the doors burst open and 3 Draconian security officers rushed in, carrying what looked like a small, unconscious dragon. But this wasn't an adult. It was a hatchling no bigger than a large dog, with scales that had not yet hardened into their adult metallic sheen. Dr. Vorthak appeared instantly, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible panic. Draconian hatchlings were incredibly rare and precious. Their species had a very low birth rate, and each new life was treasured beyond measure. The loss of a single hatchling was considered a tragedy that could affect their entire civilization. "What happened?" Vorthak demanded as the security officers placed the small dragon on the examination table. "Mining accident on the surface," one of them replied. "Tunnel collapse. The hatchling was visiting with the education group when it happened. We got everyone else out, but this little one was trapped under falling rocks for over an hour." Sarah quickly began setting up monitoring equipment while Dr. Vorthak examined the patient. The hatchling's breathing was shallow and irregular, and its small body was covered in cuts and bruises. Most concerning was a large gash along its side where a sharp rock had penetrated between its scales. "Internal bleeding," Vorthak announced grimly. "Possible organ damage. We need to operate immediately." He looked up at Sarah, and for the first time since she had known him, there was something other than suspicion in his eyes. There was fear. "Nurse Chun, I need your assistance." Sarah nodded and began preparing the surgical suite. Her movements were quick and efficient, born from years of training and experience. She had assisted in hundreds of operations aboard various stations and ships, but never on a Draconian, and certainly never on Hatchling. "Doctor," she said quietly as they worked, "I should mention, human and Draconian anatomy are more similar than most people realize. I studied comparative physiology at the Interspecies Medical Academy on Luna Station." Vorthak paused in his preparations and looked at her with surprise. "You have formal training in xenobiology?" "Advanced certification," Sarah confirmed. "Most humans in interspecies medicine do. We have to study the anatomy of at least 6 different species to qualify for off-world assignments." For the first time in the 3 years Sarah had worked under him, Dr. Vorthak's expression showed something resembling respect. "I was not aware of this requirement for your people. The surgery was delicate and complex. The hatchling's organs were indeed damaged, and the internal bleeding was severe. But Sarah's hands were steady, and her knowledge of Draconian anatomy proved invaluable. She anticipated Dr. Vorthak's needs before he could voice them, handing him instruments and adjusting equipment with practiced precision. "Remarkable," Vorthak murmured at one point. "Your hands are much smaller than mine. You can reach areas I cannot access without causing additional damage." Sarah worked in focused silence, using specialized micro-instruments designed for delicate procedures. Her human fingers, which the Draconians had always seemed to view as a liability, were perfectly suited for the intricate work required to repair the tiny organs. Hours passed. The surgery stretched deep into the station's night cycle, but neither doctor nor nurse showed any sign of fatigue. The hatchling's life hung in the balance, and both medical professionals were determined to save it. Finally, as the artificial dawn began to lighten the medical bay's windows, Dr. Vorthak completed the final sutures. The hatchling's breathing had stabilized, and its vital signs were strong. The operation had been a success. As they cleaned up, Dr. Vorthak turned to Sarah. His expression was thoughtful, and the suspicion she had grown accustomed to was nowhere to be seen. "Nurse Chun," he said slowly, "I owe you an apology. And more than that, I owe you my gratitude. Without your assistance, that hatchling would not have survived." Sarah smiled tiredly. "It's what we're here for, Doctor. To save lives." "Indeed," Vorthak agreed. "But I must ask, why did you choose interspecies medicine? With your skills, you could have had any position in human space. Why come out here, where your people are not welcomed?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because someone has to bridge the gap," she said finally. "Humans and other species were not as different as everyone thinks. We all want the same things: safety, health, happiness for our families. If I can help save one life, maybe it changes one mind. Maybe that leads to understanding." Dr. Vorthak nodded slowly. "Perhaps you were right. I confess, I have held prejudices against your species that tonight has called into question." Over the next few days, word of the successful surgery spread throughout the station. The hatchling, whose name was Zephyr, recovered remarkably quickly. Young dragons healed faster than adults, and within a week, the little creature was awake and alert, though still confined to the medical bay for observation. Sarah found herself assigned as Zephyr's primary caretaker, a decision that Dr. Vorthak explained as purely practical. "Your smaller size makes it easier for you to handle the patient without causing discomfort," he had said, but Sarah suspected there was more to it than that. Caring for a dragon hatchling was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Zephyr was intelligent in a way that was both childlike and ancient. The little dragon could speak, though its voice was still the high, piping sound of youth rather than the musical tones of adult draconians. Its questions were endless and often surprisingly profound. "Why did you fix me?" Zephyr asked one afternoon as Sarah checked its bandages. My parents say humans are dangerous. They say your kind only knows how to hurt things. Sarah paused in her work. What do you think? She asked gently. Zephyr's large, golden eyes studied her seriously. I think you're kind. You sing to me when I am scared, and your hands are gentle. You do not seem dangerous. People aren't always what others say they are, Sarah replied. Sometimes we have to look for ourselves to know the truth. The little dragon considered this. Will you tell me about your people? The real truth, not the stories. So Sarah began to share. She told Zephyr about Earth, about the vast cities and wild places where humans lived. She spoke of human art and music, of the drive to explore and discover that had brought her people to the stars. She explained human medicine, how they had learned to heal not just their own kind, but any species they encountered. Humans are curious, she explained. Sometimes that gets us into trouble, but it also means we won't learn to understand. We make mistakes, but we try to fix them. Zephyr listened to everything with rapt attention. The hatchling's questions became more thoughtful, more nuanced. Sarah found herself looking forward to their conversations as much as the little dragon did. But not everyone on the station was pleased with these developments. Commander Thoraxis, the station's military commander, arrived at the medical bay on Zephyr's 5th day of recovery. He was an imposing figure, even by draconian standards, with scales like polished steel and eyes like chips of ice. His presence filled the room with an almost palpable tension. Dr. Vorthak, he said without preamble, I need to speak with you about the human. Sarah continued her work, checking Zephyr's vital signs, but she could feel the commander's gaze burning into her back. What about Nurse Chin? Dr. Vorthak asked carefully. There are concerns, Thoraxis replied. Questions about whether it is appropriate for a human to have such close contact with one of our young. The hatchling's parents have asked that their child be assigned a draconian caretaker. Sarah's hands stilled on the medical scanner. She had known this was coming. It had been too good to last. Commander, Dr. Vorthak said, his voice taking on a formal tone, Nurse Chun has provided exemplary care. The hatchling's recovery has been remarkable, in large part due to her dedicated attention. That may be, Thoraxis conceded, but the concerns remain. Humans have a history. We cannot risk exposing our young to potentially harmful influences. What harmful influences? A small voice piped up from the bed. Everyone turned to look at Zephyr, who was sitting up and regarding the adults with bright, curious eyes. Nothing that concerns you, young one, Commander Thoraxis said, his voice gentling slightly. We're simply discussing your medical care. Are you going to take Sarah away? Zephyr asked directly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Commander Thoraxis looked uncomfortable, while Dr. Vorthak's expression was carefully neutral. Nurse Chun has many duties, Thoraxis said finally. She cannot spend all her time with one patient. But she makes me feel better, Zephyr protested. Not just my injuries. She makes me feel safe. And she teaches me things. Did you know that humans have saved more species from extinction than any other people in the galaxy? Commander Thoraxis's eyes narrowed. Who told you that? Sarah did. She showed me the records. Humans helped save the crystalline entities when their homeworld was dying. They developed the cure for the plague of Andromeda that was killing the Centauri. They rescued the entire aquatic coalition when their star went nova. The little dragon's voice was gaining strength and conviction. She says helping others is what humans do best. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had shared those stories with Zephyr not to make propaganda, but because the little dragon had asked about human contributions to the galaxy. Now, hearing them repeated with such earnest conviction, she realized how powerful they sounded. Historical records can be interpreted in many ways, Commander Thoraxis said stiffly. But these aren't interpretations, Zephyr continued. These are facts, and Sarah saved my life. If humans are so dangerous, why did she do that? The question was simple, but its implications were enormous. Commander Thoraxis found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to explain prejudice to a child who had experienced nothing but kindness. The situation is complicated, he said finally. No, it isn't, Zephyr replied with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. Sarah is good. She helped me when I was hurt. That makes her my friend. And I don't want her to go away. Before anyone could respond, the medical bay doors chimed open, and 2 adult draconians entered. These were clearly Zephyr's parents. They had the same golden eyes and carried themselves with the regal bearing of the upper nobility. Sarah stepped back respectfully as they approached their child. The female, whom Sarah assumed was Zephyr's mother, was particularly beautiful, with scales that shimmered between gold and copper. Her mate was larger, with darker bronze coloring and an aura of quiet authority. "My child," the female said, her voice filled with relief and love. "We came as soon as Commander Thoraxis told us you were awake and alert." Zephyr's face lit up. "Mother, Father, I'm so much better now. Sarah has been taking care of me, and she is wonderful." The 2 adults exchanged glances, and Sarah saw the female's expression tighten slightly. "Yes," she said carefully, "we have heard about the humans' involvement in your care." "Her name is Sarah," Zephyr corrected firmly, "and she saved my life." Dr. Vorthak said so. The male draconian, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Young one, we are grateful for the medical attention you received. But now that you are recovering, it may be time for more appropriate arrangements." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had known this was inevitable, but it still hurt. She had grown genuinely fond of the little dragon, and she believed Zephyr felt the same way about her. "What do you mean, Father?" Zephyr asked, confusion clear in its voice. "We mean," the female said gently, "that you should be cared for by your own people now. Someone who understands our ways, our culture." Zephyr's expression grew troubled. "But Sarah understands me. She listens to my questions and explains things. She doesn't treat me like I'm too young to know anything." "Child," Commander Thoraxis interjected, "your parents are concerned about proper influences during your recovery. Humans have different values than our people." "What different values?" Zephyr asked with the relentless logic of youth. The question caught the adults off guard. Sarah found herself holding her breath, waiting to hear how they would explain their prejudice to a child who had experienced nothing but kindness from the human they distrusted. "Well," the female began hesitantly, "humans are known to be aggressive, violent. They solve problems with force rather than wisdom." Zephyr looked confused. "But Sarah has never been violent. She is the gentlest person I know. And when I asked her about human ways, she told me about diplomacy and negotiation. She said humans prefer to solve problems by talking, and violence is only used as a last resort to protect innocent people." "She would say that," Commander Thoraxis muttered. "Are you calling Sarah a liar?" Zephyr's voice took on a dangerous edge that reminded everyone present that even young dragons were formidable creatures. "No, child," Dr. Vorthak interjected smoothly, "but perhaps the human presented a selective view of her people's history." "Then show me the complete records," Zephyr demanded. "I want to see everything. If Sarah has been lying to me, I should know." The adults looked at each other uncertainly. Clearly, none of them had expected the hatchling to demand evidence for their claims. "Perhaps," the male dragon said carefully, "this is not the time for such discussions. You are still recovering, and these matters are complex." "I'm feeling much better," Zephyr insisted. "And I'm not too young to understand complex things. Sarah says I am very intelligent for my age." "Of course she does," the female murmured. "What does that mean?" Zephyr's voice was rising now, and Sarah could see the little dragon's scales beginning to flush with color, a sign of agitation. "Calm yourself, child," Dr. Vorthak said quickly. "We don't want to upset your recovery." But Zephyr was not to be distracted. "Everyone keeps saying bad things about Sarah, but no one has given me any proof. She saved my life. She has been kind to me. She has taught me many wonderful things about the galaxy. If you want me to believe she is bad, you need to show me why." The challenge in Hatchling's voice was unmistakable. Sarah felt a surge of pride in the little dragon's courage, even as she dreaded what might come next. Commander Thoraxis stepped forward, his expression stern. Young one, there are things about the galaxy that you do not yet understand. Some truths are too harsh for the young. Try me, Zephyr said simply. The commander looked to Zephyr's parents, seeking guidance. The female sighed deeply. Very well, she said. If you insist on hearing this, we will tell you. But you must promise to listen with an open mind and accept that we, as adults, understand things you may not yet grasp. Zephyr nodded eagerly. I promise. The female dragon moved closer to her child, her expression serious. Humans, my dear one, have a history of violence and aggression that spans their entire existence. They have fought countless wars, not just against external threats, but against their own kind. They have developed weapons capable of destroying entire planets. They have a saying, might makes right, that exemplifies their approach to problem solving. Sarah wanted to object, to explain the context and complexity of human history, but she knew that speaking now would only make things worse. Their expansion into space, the female continued, has been marked by conflict. They have been involved in 3 major galactic incidents in just 20 years. They are impulsive, quick to anger, and slow to forgive. These are not the qualities we want influencing our young. Zephyr listened to all of this with serious attention. When its mother finished speaking, the little dragon was quiet for a long moment, considering. Mother, Zephyr said finally, may I ask you some questions about what you have told me? Of course, dear one. You say humans fight wars against their own kind. Do Draconians ever fight each other? The female looked uncomfortable. Well, yes, in our history, there have been conflicts between different clans and territories. But that was long ago, and we have evolved beyond such behavior. How long ago? Several thousand years. And humans have been in space for how long? About 200 years. So you are comparing thousands of years of draconian development to 200 years of human development. The adults exchanged glances. The hatchling's logic was uncomfortably sound. You say they have weapons that can destroy planets, Zephyr continued. Do we have such weapons? Yes, the female admitted reluctantly, but we would never use them. Have humans ever used theirs to destroy a planet? Another uncomfortable pause. No, Commander Thoraxis said finally. But they have the capability. As do we, Zephyr pointed out. You say they are quick to anger, but Sarah has never shown anger with me, even when I asked her the same question many times or when I was frightened and difficult to care for. She's been nothing but patient and kind. The little dragon paused, then looked directly at its parents. Mother, father, I think you're judging all humans based on fear, not facts. And I think you're judging Sarah based on what you think humans are like, instead of who she actually is. The silence that followed this statement was profound. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. The little dragon's faith in her was both humbling and heartbreaking. Child, the male dragon said gently, you are very young. There are subtleties to these matters that I am too young to understand, Zephyr finished. You keep saying that. But answer me this. If humans are so terrible, why did the Galactic Council admit them? Why are they allowed in medical positions where they could hurt people if they wanted to? And why did Sarah risk her own career to save my life? What do you mean, risk her career? Dr. Vorthak asked sharply. Zephyr looked at the doctor with surprise. She told me that operating on a draconian, especially a hatchling, was not something human medical personnel were usually allowed to do. She said if anything had gone wrong, she would have been blamed and sent away from space service forever. But she did it anyway because she wanted to save me. All eyes turned to Sarah, who felt her cheeks burning. She had not realized that Zephyr had understood the implications of what she had shared. Is this true? Commander Thoraxis demanded. Sarah nodded reluctantly. Human medical personnel are not typically authorized for major procedures on draconian patients without extensive oversight and approval from draconian medical boards. In an emergency situation like this, if the surgery had failed, I would likely have faced charges of practicing beyond my authorized scope. But you proceeded anyway? The female dragon asked, her voice strange. The hatchling was dying, Sarah said simply. Dr. Vorthak needed assistance that only someone with my size and dexterity could provide. The choice was between possibly saving a life and definitely losing one. It wasn't really a choice at all. The room fell silent again. Sarah could see the adults processing this information, trying to reconcile it with their preconceived notions about humans. So, Zephyr said into the silence, Sarah risked everything to save me. Even though she barely knew me, even though my people have treated her with suspicion and disrespect. Does this sound like the behavior of a dangerous, violent species to you? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah had to admire the little dragon's courage in challenging the adults this way. Young one, Commander Thoraxis said finally, his voice unusually subdued, you make valid points. Perhaps we have been hasty in our judgments. Perhaps, the female dragon agreed slowly. We owe Nurse Chun a debt of gratitude that goes beyond simple medical care. Sarah felt a spark of hope, but she knew better than to assume this conversation had changed everything. Prejudice was not easily overcome, even when confronted with evidence. I have a proposal, Dr. Vorthak said suddenly. Nurse Chun, you have proven yourself capable of exceptional care for our young. Would you be willing to extend your assignment here to oversee Zephyr's complete recovery? Sarah's heart leaped. I would be honored, Doctor. And he continued, looking at Zephyr's parents, perhaps this could serve as an opportunity for our peoples to learn from each other. Zephyr could teach Nurse Chun about our customs and history, while learning about human culture and medicine. The male and female dragons considered this proposal. Sarah held her breath, waiting for their decision. On one condition, the female said finally, I want to observe these interactions myself. I want to see firsthand what kind of influence this human has on my child. Of course, Sarah agreed immediately. You're welcome anytime. And so it was arranged. Sarah would continue as Zephyr's primary caretaker, with increased supervision and observation from Draconian staff and family. It was not the full acceptance she had hoped for, but it was a beginning. As the adults finalized the arrangements, Zephyr caught Sarah's hand in its small claws. Thank you, the little dragon whispered, for saving me and for not giving up. Sarah squeezed the small claws gently. Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. Neither of them knew that their bond would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine, or that the events set in motion by one small dragon's faith in a human nurse would change the course of galactic history forever. 3 weeks had passed since the arrangement had been made, and Sarah found herself settling into a new routine that felt both natural and surreal. Zephyr's recovery had progressed remarkably well, and the little dragon was now able to move about the medical bay freely, though still under careful observation. True to her word, Zephyr's mother, whose name Sarah had learned was Lady Aureliana, visited daily. At first, these visits had been tense affairs, with the elegant Draconian watching Sarah's every move with sharp eyes, as if expecting some sign of the dangerous human nature she had been warned about. But as the days passed, something remarkable began to happen. Lady Aureliana started to see what Zephyr saw, a dedicated caregiver who genuinely cared for her child's well-being. She witnessed Sarah's patience when Zephyr became frustrated with the limitations of recovery. She observed the gentle way Sarah explained complex medical concepts in terms the young dragon could understand. She heard the quiet songs Sarah hummed, while working melodies that seemed to soothe Zephyr during difficult moments. Nurse Chun, Lady Oriana said one afternoon as she watched Sarah help Zephyr practice stretching exercises. May I ask you something personal? Sarah looked up from where she was guiding Zephyr through a wing-strengthening movement. Of course, Lady Aureliana. Do you have children of your own? The question caught Sarah off guard. She paused in her work, a shadow crossing her face. No, she said quietly. No, I don't. Forgive me, Lady Oriana said quickly, sensing she had touched on something painful. I did not mean to pry. It's all right, Sarah replied, though her voice remained subdued. I had hoped to someday, but my career in interspecies medicine means long assignments in deep space. It doesn't leave much room for personal relationships. Zephyr, who had been listening to this exchange with interest, tilted its head thoughtfully. Is that why you're so good with me? Because you practice for when you have your own children? Sarah smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Maybe something like that. Or maybe I just like taking care of people who need help. Well, Zephyr declared with characteristic directness, you would make an excellent mother. You're kind and smart and brave. Lady Oriana found herself nodding in agreement before she realized what she was doing. The sentiment surprised her. When had she begun to think of this human in such positive terms? It was during the 4th week that everything changed. Sarah was in the middle of what had become a daily tradition, story time with Zephyr. The little dragon loved hearing about different worlds and cultures, and Sarah had discovered she had a talent for bringing these tales to life. Today, she was telling Zephyr about the crystal caves of Luminous 7, where sentient gems sang symphonies that could be heard across entire continents. And the music, Sarah was saying, her voice taking on a dreamy quality, was supposed to be so beautiful that travelers would weep just listening to it. The crystal beings said each song told the story of a star's birth, from the first spark of hydrogen fusion to the station's emergency alarm shattered the peaceful moment. Red lights flashed throughout the medical bay as the automated announcement system crackled to life. Code Black. Code Black. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Sarah's blood ran cold. Code Black was the highest level of emergency, imminent threat to the station itself. She had only heard it once before, during a training exercise that had felt terrifyingly real. Dr. Vorthak burst into the medical bay, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. Sarah, get Zephyr to the secure medical bunker immediately. Lady Oriana, you need to get to the civilian evacuation zone. What's happening? Lady Oriana demanded, moving protectively toward her child. Long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet approaching the system. Vorthak explained rapidly as he began gathering emergency medical supplies. Unknown configuration, not responding to hails. They'll be here within the hour. Sarah felt her stomach drop. An unknown fleet that wouldn't respond to communications usually meant only one thing: hostile intent. She began moving immediately, gathering Zephyr's medical files and medications. Come on, little one, she said to Zephyr, keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart. We need to move to a safer place. But Zephyr didn't move. The little dragon was staring at Dr. Vorthak with an expression Sarah had never seen before. A mixture of fear and something else. Recognition? Doctor, Zephyr said slowly, what did the ships look like? Vorthak paused in his frantic preparations. Dark hulls, angular design, very large. Why do you ask? Zephyr's scales had gone pale, and Sarah saw the little dragon begin to tremble. How many ships? The initial count was over 300 vessels, Vorthak replied. Zephyr, why are you asking these questions? The little dragon closed its eyes, and when it opened them again, Sarah saw something there that made her heart ache. The look of a child who had just realized the world was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Because, Zephyr said quietly, I think they're here for me. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Sarah stared at the little dragon she had grown to love, trying to process what it had just said. What do you mean? Lady Oriana asked, her voice tight with fear. Zephyr looked at its mother with eyes that seemed far too old for such a young creature. Mother, there are things about why I was on the surface that I didn't tell you. Things the education group leaders made me promise not to say. What things? Dr. Vorthak demanded. We weren't just visiting the mining operation, Zephyr said slowly. We were there because our teachers had discovered something. Ancient ruins buried deep under the main excavation site. Draconian ruins, but older than anything in our recorded history. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Ancient alien ruins were always significant, but ancient draconian ruins could be world-changing. The archaeologists said the ruins contained information about our people's origins, Zephyr continued, about where we came from before we reached our homeworld. But more than that, they found records of others. Other draconians who had left our space thousands of years ago and were never heard from again. The Lost Clans, Lady Aureliana whispered, her face going pale. Sarah had heard whispers of the Lost Clans during her time on the station. According to draconian legend, several clans had vanished from known space millennia ago, taking with them advanced technology and ancient knowledge. Most modern draconians consider the myth, but apparently, some took the legend seriously. The ruins contained star charts, Zephyr said, its voice getting smaller with each word. Maps showing where the lost clans went, and communication protocols, frequencies, and code that could be used to contact them. Did anyone use these protocols? Dr. Vorthak asked, though from his expression, Sarah suspected he already knew the answer. Zephyr nodded miserably. The expedition leader, Professor Kyrians, he was so excited. He said this was the discovery of the millennium. He sent out a signal using the ancient codes, broadcasting on the frequencies from the ruins. And now they've come, Lady Aureliana said, understanding flooding her voice. But why would that be dangerous? Sarah asked, though even as she spoke, she was beginning to understand. Because Dr. Vorthak said grimly, the Lost Clans didn't leave voluntarily. They were exiled, cast out for practices and beliefs that the rest of draconian civilization found abhorrent. What kind of practices? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Slavery, Lady Aureliana said quietly. Conquest, the subjugation of what they called lesser species. The Lost Clans believed that draconians were meant to rule the galaxy, with all other species serving as their vassals or livestock. Sarah felt sick. The gentle, thoughtful dragons she had come to know were nothing like the picture being painted of their exiled cousins. They were cast out over 10,000 years ago, Dr. Vorthak continued, after a civil war that nearly destroyed our civilization. We hoped they had died out in the deep dark between galaxies. But they didn't, Zephyr said miserably. And now they're coming back. And it's my fault because I was there when Professor Kyrians sent the signal. Sarah moved instinctively to comfort the little dragon, but Zephyr shrank away from her touch. Don't you see? Zephyr said, tears beginning to flow down its scaled cheeks. They'll want to know about the signal, about who was there, about what we found. And when they discover that a human was involved in my care, that I've been influenced by one of the species they consider inferior. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If the Lost Clans were as xenophobic as described, her presence here, her bond with Zephyr, could be seen as contamination or corruption. They'll kill you, Zephyr finished, its voice breaking. They'll kill you for touching me, for saving me, for being kind to me. And it will be my fault because I let you. Sarah knelt down in front of Zephyr, ignoring the little dragon's attempts to pull away. Hey, she said firmly, look at me. Reluctantly, Zephyr met her eyes. This is not your fault, Sarah said clearly. You were a child on an educational trip. You didn't ask for any of this to happen. And you certainly didn't ask to be injured in that cave-in. But if you hadn't been there, Professor Kyrians would have sent that signal anyway, Sarah interrupted. The only difference is that I might never have had the chance to know you. And that would have been a tragedy far worse than whatever is coming now. Dr. Vorthak, who had been listening to this exchange while monitoring his communications equipment, suddenly stiffened. They're hailing the station, he announced. The main communication screen in the medical bay flickered to life, showing the bridge of Harmony 7. Commander Thoraxis stood in the center, his usual stern expression now edged with genuine concern. All stations, all personnel, Thoraxis announced. We have received communication from the approaching fleet. They identify themselves as the Crimson Talon clan of the Lost Brotherhood. They are demanding the immediate surrender of all personnel involved in what they call the desecration of sacred sites and the corruption of sacred youth by inferior species. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. The way the message was phrased made it clear that they somehow already knew about her involvement with Zephyr. They have given us 1 hour to comply with their demands, Thoraxis continued, or they will consider the station and all aboard to be enemies of the true draconian way. The transmission ended, leaving the medical bay in stunned silence. How do they know? Lady Orleana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Vorthack's expression was grim. Professor Kirian's expedition team. If the Lost Clans took the mining colony, they would have interrogated the survivors. They would know exactly who was present, what happened, and who has been involved since. Sarah stood up slowly, her mind racing. Then, they know about the surgery. They know I operated on Zephyr. They know more than that, a new voice said from the doorway. Commander Thoraxis had arrived, his expression grave. We've been monitoring their communications. They consider the hatchling to be contaminated by human contact. They're demanding that both the human and the hatchling be turned over to them for what they call purification. The word purification hung in the air like a death sentence. Nobody needed to ask what that meant. No, Lady Orleana said suddenly, her voice ringing with authority. Absolutely not. I will not allow my child to be handed over to those monsters. Lady Orleana, Commander Thoraxis said carefully, I understand your feelings, but we must consider the safety of everyone on this station. Over 300 ships are full of exiles and criminals who were cast out for good reason. Lady Orleana interrupted. My child has done nothing wrong, and Nurse Chun saved my child's life. I will not see either of them sacrificed to appease these relics of our shameful past. Commander Thoraxis looked uncomfortable. The Galactic Council has been notified, but the nearest fleet is 6 days away. We cannot hold against such numbers. Then, we evacuate, Sarah said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. We evacuate, she repeated, stronger now. Get everyone off the station. Send them to different locations. Make it impossible for the Lost Clans to find who they're looking for. Nurse Chun, Commander Thoraxis said gently, running will only delay the inevitable. The Lost Clans have resources we can barely imagine. They will find us eventually. Maybe, Sarah agreed. But that gives us time. Time for the Council fleets to arrive. Time to figure out a better solution than just handing people over to be murdered. She's right, Dr. Vorthack said suddenly. We have emergency evacuation protocols. We can scatter the personnel across dozens of systems. Commander Thoraxis was quiet for a long moment, considering. The evacuation would take hours. The fleet will be here in less than one. Then, we buy time, Lady Orleana said firmly. We negotiate. We stall. We do whatever it takes to protect the innocent. Lady Orleana, Commander Thoraxis said carefully. Your husband is Duke Theron of the Fourth House. Your family has significant political influence. If you publicly support these actions, it will be seen as an official stance by the draconian government. Good, Lady Orleana replied without hesitation. Let it be seen that way. Let the galaxy know that modern draconians do not negotiate with terrorists, no matter what they call themselves. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. This noble draconian woman, who had been suspicious of humans just weeks ago, was now prepared to risk everything to protect her. I have another idea, Zephyr said quietly. Everyone turned to look at the little dragon, who had been silent during this exchange. What if we don't run? Zephyr continued. What if we face them? Zephyr, no, Lady Orleana said immediately. These are not people who can be reasoned with. Not reasoned with, Zephyr agreed, but maybe challenged. The little dragon looked at each adult in turn, its golden eyes bright with an idea that was both terrible and brilliant. The Lost Clans still follow the old ways, right? The ancient codes of honor and combat. Commander Thoraxis nodded slowly. According to our historical records, yes. Then, they would be bound by the law of sacred challenge, Zephyr continued. If someone issued a formal challenge on grounds of honor, They would have to accept it or lose face before their own people. Zephyr, you are far too young for such a challenge to be valid, Dr. Vorthak pointed out. I know, Zephyr said, but someone else could issue the challenge on my behalf. Someone whose honor had been questioned by their accusations. All eyes turned to Sarah, who suddenly understood what Zephyr was suggesting. Absolutely not, Dr. Vorthak said immediately. A human issuing a sacred challenge to the lost clans? They would consider it an insult worthy of immediate execution. Would they? Zephyr asked. Or would they be so curious about a lesser species daring to invoke their ancient laws that they would be forced to respond? The old codes are very specific. Any being who formally invokes the sacred challenge and states valid grounds must be heard. Sarah found herself considering the idea despite its obvious dangers. What would the challenge involve? Combat, Commander Thoraxis said flatly. Single combat between champions, with the loser's faction accepting the winner's terms. But that's impossible, Lady Oriana protested. No human could stand against a draconian warrior in single combat. Normally, no, Zephyr agreed. But the sacred challenge doesn't have to be about physical combat. It could be about any form of contest that tests virtue, skill, or honor. The challenger gets to choose the nature of the test. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of test? Well, Zephyr said thoughtfully, you could challenge them to a contest of healing. See who can save more lives or heal more complicated injuries. That would force them to acknowledge your skills while playing to your strengths. They would never agree to that, Commander Thoraxis said. They would if the challenge was properly framed, Zephyr insisted. If Sarah challenged their claim that humans are inferior by offering to prove human worth through the sacred art of preserving life, they would be forced to either accept the challenge or admit that they fear losing to a lesser species. The idea was audacious, dangerous, and possibly brilliant. Sarah found herself actually considering it. Even if they agreed, Dr. Vorthak said, what would be the stakes? What would we be fighting for? The right to exist, Sarah said quietly. The right for different species to coexist peacefully. The right for healing to matter more than hatred. The medical bay fell silent as everyone contemplated the magnitude of what was being discussed. A single human challenging the might of the lost clans, with the fate of galactic coexistence hanging in the balance. It's insane, Lady Oriana said finally. Yes, Sarah agreed, but it's also the right thing to do. Before anyone could respond, the station's communications system crackled to life again. This time, the voice that came through was different, older, more authoritative, and filled with the kind of cold certainty that made Sarah's skin crawl. Harmony 7 Station, the voice said, This is War Master Draconis of the Crimson Talon clan. You have harbored corruption and allowed the sacred blood of our young to be defiled by inferior hands. You have 30 minutes to deliver the contaminated hatchling and the human aberration to our custody, or we will cleanse your station with fire and reclaim what belongs to the true inheritors of the galaxy. The transmission ended, leaving behind a silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. The noble draconian mother who had become her unlikely ally, the skilled doctor who had learned to respect her abilities, the military commander wrestling with an impossible decision, and the brave little dragon whose faith in her had started this entire chain of events. Commander Thoraxis, she said formally, I wish to invoke the sacred challenge as defined by ancient draconian law. I challenge the Lost Clan's assertion that humans are inferior beings unworthy of respect or consideration. Commander Thoraxis stared at her for a long moment. Nurse Chun, you understand what you are asking? I understand, Sarah replied. And I also understand that sometimes, when faced with impossible choices, the only option is to create a new possibility. The commander was quiet for another moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. I will transmit your challenge to the Lost Clan fleet. As Thoraxis moved to his communication console, Zephyr padded over to Sarah and looked up at her with eyes full of admiration and fear. Thank you, the little dragon whispered. For everything. Sarah knelt down and gently stroked Zephyr's scaled head. Thank you for believing that the galaxy could be better than the hatred others want to teach you. Within minutes, Sarah's challenge had been transmitted to the Lost Clan fleet. The response, when it came, was swift and filled with a cold amusement that made Sarah's blood run cold. So, War Master Draconis' voice echoed through the station. The human aberration thinks itself worthy of invoking our sacred laws. Very well. We accept your challenge, not because we recognize your worth, but because it will be amusing to demonstrate your species' inferiority before we cleanse the galaxy of your taint. Sarah felt her heart pounding, but her voice was steady as she replied, I propose a contest of healing arts, the preservation and restoration of life, to determine whose methods and philosophy are truly superior. The pause that followed was long enough that Sarah began to wonder if they had refused. Interesting, came the eventual reply. The aberration wishes to compete in the art of preserving inferior life. Very well. We accept this challenge. Our greatest healer against yours. The terms, each contestant will be given patients of equal severity and complexity. Whoever achieves the greatest success in healing will be declared the victor. And the stakes? Sarah asked. If you lose, Draconis said, his voice carrying cruel satisfaction. You and the contaminated hatchling will submit to purification, and your people will be banned from all sectors under our protection. If, by some impossible chance, you win, we will consider negotiating about our presence here. The terms were hardly fair, but they were better than immediate destruction. Agreed, Sarah said, sealing her fate. As the Lost Clan fleet moved into position around the station, Sarah found herself preparing for the most important medical challenge of her life. But she was not preparing alone. Lady Oriana stood beside her, organizing supplies. Dr. Vorthak briefed her on advanced draconian physiology. Commander Thoraxis provided intelligence on Lost Clan medical practices. And Zephyr, the little dragon whose life she had saved and whose faith in her had made this all possible, sat nearby offering quiet encouragement and unwavering belief that somehow, against all odds, kindness and skill would prove stronger than hatred and supremacy. The stage was set for a contest that would determine not just their fates, but the future relationship between humans and the wider galaxy. Sarah only hoped that her years of training and her commitment to healing would be enough to face whatever the Lost Clans had in store. The Lost Clan ships were unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Where modern draconian vessels were elegant, flowing works of art that resembled living creatures, these ancient ships were angular and brutal. Their black hulls absorbed light, making them look like tears in space itself. Weapon ports bristled along their surfaces like the spines of some prehistoric predator. Sarah watched through the medical bay's viewing port as the largest of these vessels, easily 3 times the size of Harmony 7 Station, positioned itself alongside their docking ports. The ship's name was written in ancient draconian script that seemed to writhe and shift when she looked at it directly. The Bloodied Crown, Dr. Vorthak translated quietly, reading over her shoulder. War Master Draconis' flagship. It was considered lost when the clans were exiled. How is it still functional after 10,000 years? Sarah asked. Draconian engineering from that era was different, Lady Oriana explained. They built their ships to last millennia, self-repairing, self-sustaining. Unfortunately, they also built them to intimidate and terrify. As if summoned by her words, the docking clamps engaged with a sound like thunder. Sarah felt the station shudder under the impact, and she couldn't help wondering if the violence was intentional, a demonstration of the Lost Clan's disregard for gentle contact. They're requesting permission to board, Commander Thoraxis announced through the communication system. War Master Draconis himself, along with their challenger and a small retinue. Sarah took a deep breath. Let them come. The next 20 minutes felt like the longest of Sarah's life. She used the time to check and recheck her medical supplies, review procedures in her head, and try to calm the nervous energy that made her hands want to shake. Zephyr stayed close to her, offering quiet moral support that meant more than the little dragon probably realized. When the Lost Clan delegation finally arrived at the medical bay, Sarah understood immediately why the modern Draconians considered their exiled cousins monsters. War Master Draconis was enormous, even by Draconian standards. His scales were a deep, blood-red color that seemed to absorb light, and his eyes burned with a cold fire that spoke of millennia of hatred and conquest. Scars covered his massive frame, not the accidental marks of injury, but deliberate patterns carved into his hide as symbols of rank and victory. When he moved, his claws scraped against the deck, plating with a sound like knives being sharpened. Behind him came others of his kind, all bearing the same deliberate scarification and the same aura of barely restrained violence. But it was the figure beside Draconis that made Sarah's blood run cold. The Lost Clan's challenger was a female dragon, smaller than the War Master, but no less intimidating. Her scales were a sickly green-black color, and where other Draconians had warm, intelligent eyes, hers were flat and cold. Most disturbing were her claws. They had been surgically enhanced, extended, and sharpened to points that could slice through metal. "So," Draconis rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, "this is the human aberration that dares to invoke our sacred laws." His gaze fell on Sarah with the same expression one might use when examining an interesting insect. Smaller than I expected. Weaker looking too. Sarah forced herself to stand straight and meet his gaze. "War Master Draconis, I am Sarah Chun, and I formally challenge your assertion that humans are inferior to your people." Draconis laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Formal challenge accepted, little creature. Allow me to introduce Vixen Scarith, our greatest healer, and your opponent in this farce." Scarith stepped forward, and Sarah noticed that the dragon's movements were wrong somehow. Too precise, too calculated, lacking the natural grace that characterized other Draconians. When she spoke, her voice was emotionless, clinical. "I have studied the files your people were forced to transmit regarding this challenge," Scarith said. "Your primitive medical techniques will prove amusing to dismantle." "The terms of the challenge," Draconis announced formally, "are as follows. Each healer will be presented with 3 patients of increasing difficulty. Success will be measured not merely by whether the patient survives, but by the speed, efficiency, and elegance of the healing process. Our judges will evaluate each contestant's performance." Sarah looked around the medical bay, which had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate the challenge. 2 complete surgical suites had been set up, along with observation areas for the judges and witnesses. "Who are the judges?" Lady Aureliana asked. "Myself, naturally," Draconis replied. "Commander Thoraxis of this station," and he paused, a cruel smile crossing his features, "the contaminated hatchling. Since this entire challenge stems from concern over its corruption, it seems appropriate that it should witness the demonstration of human inadequacy." Sarah saw Zephyr stiffen beside her, but the little dragon's voice was steady when it replied. "I accept the responsibility of serving as judge." "Excellent," Draconis purred. "Now let us begin. The first patients are being prepared." What followed was unlike any medical challenge Sarah had ever faced. The first case was brought in on a hovering stretcher, a young Draconian with severe burns covering nearly 30% of his body. The injuries looked recent and painful, but they were within the range of standard emergency medicine. A second stretcher carried an identical patient, another young Draconian with burns in exactly the same pattern and severity. "Curious," Dr. Vorthak murmured quietly. "Those injuries are remarkably similar." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what she was seeing. The Lost Clans hadn't brought injured patients. They had created them. These 2 young Draconians had been deliberately burned to provide subjects for the healing challenge. "Begin," Draconis commanded. Sarah hesitated for a moment, her mind reeling from the implications of what she had discovered. Then Her medical training took over, and she moved to her patient's side. Whatever horrors these people were capable of, the young dragon on her table needed help now. She began with a thorough assessment, checking vital signs, measuring the extent of the burns, and evaluating the risk of infection and shock. Her patient was conscious, but clearly in significant pain. "Hello," she said gently, taking the young dragon's claw in her hand. "I'm Sarah. I'm going to take care of you." The dragon looked up at her with confusion and fear. "You're human," he whispered. "Yes, I am," Sarah confirmed, beginning to prepare pain medication. "Is that a problem?" I was told humans were cruel, that they enjoyed causing pain." Sarah felt her heart break a little. Some humans might be cruel, just like some of any species might be. But I'm not. I'm here to help you feel better. As she worked, she could hear Scareth in the adjacent suite. The Lost Clan healer worked in complete silence, showing no compassion or gentleness toward her patient. Her movements were efficient but cold, treating the injured dragon like a broken machine to be repaired rather than a living being in pain. Sarah, in contrast, talked to her patient throughout the procedure. She explained what she was doing, warned him before anything might hurt, and offered reassurance when he seemed afraid. Her technique was perhaps slightly slower than Scareth's, but her patient was clearly more comfortable. "Interesting approach," Draconis observed, watching Sarah work. "Wasting time on emotional comfort rather than focusing on efficiency." "Healing isn't just about repairing tissue," Sarah replied as she carefully cleaned and treated the burned areas. "It's about treating the whole being, body, mind, and spirit." "Sentiment," Scareth said dismissively from her station, irrelevant to the medical process. But Zephyr, watching from the observation area, was paying close attention to both approaches. The little dragon could see the difference in the patient's responses. Sarah's patient, while still in pain, seemed calmer and more hopeful. Scareth's patient appeared tense and afraid despite receiving technically proficient care. Both healers finished their treatments at approximately the same time. Sarah's patient was resting comfortably, his burns properly cleaned and dressed, his pain managed, and his spirits noticeably improved. Scareth's patient was medically stable, but appeared emotionally traumatized by the experience. "Round 1 complete," Draconis announced. "Both patients will survive, though the human's excessive emotionalism added unnecessary time to the process. The second challenge will now begin." The second case was more complex. A draconian who had apparently suffered massive internal injuries in some kind of accident. The extent of the damage required immediate surgery, and Sarah could see that this would test the limits of both healers' abilities. Again, 2 identical patients were brought in, and again, Sarah realized with growing horror that these injuries had been deliberately inflicted. This time, the challenge was purely technical. Both healers worked in focused silence, performing complex procedures to repair damaged organs and stop internal bleeding. Sarah found herself drawing on every aspect of her training, using techniques she had learned from a dozen different species to address the unique challenges of draconian physiology. Scareth's approach was brutally efficient. She worked with mechanical precision, her enhanced claws serving as surgical instruments. But Sarah noticed that the Lost Clan healer seemed to view the patient as expendable. She took risks that a more compassionate doctor would never consider, pushing the limits of what the patient could survive in pursuit of speed. Sarah's approach was more conservative, but also more innovative. When standard techniques proved insufficient, she adapted procedures she had learned from other species, modifying them for draconian anatomy. Her patient remained stable throughout the operation, while Scareth's showed signs of distress. "Curious," Dr. Vorthak murmured to Lady Orleana. "The human is using crystalline regeneration techniques adapted for carbon-based physiology. I've never seen that done before." The surgery stretched on for hours. Both healers were pushed to their limits, but Sarah's patient pulled through with significantly less trauma than Scareth's. When the operation was complete, Sarah's dragon was stable and comfortable, while Scarith's was alive but in critical condition. Round 2, Draconis announced, though his tone was less certain than before. The human shows unexpected competence. But the final challenge will reveal the true difference between our peoples. The third patient made Sarah's stomach turn. It was a hatchling no older than Zephyr, with injuries so severe that Sarah wasn't sure anyone could save it. Multiple organ failure, massive trauma, blood loss that should have been fatal. It was the most challenging medical case she had ever seen. And, once again, there were 2 identical patients. "You monsters," Lady Oriana breathed, understanding what she was seeing. "We are what Draconians were meant to be," Draconis replied coldly. "Strong enough to make the difficult choices. These hatchlings were weak, defective. Their deaths will serve a greater purpose." Sarah felt a rage building inside her, unlike anything she had ever experienced. These people had tortured children to create medical puzzles. They had turned healing into a game played with innocent lives. But her anger only strengthened her resolve. If there was any chance of saving these little ones, she would find it. "Begin the final challenge," Draconis commanded. Sarah approached her patient, a small dragon with pale blue scales and barely perceptible breathing. The little creature was unconscious, its body broken in ways that should have been impossible to survive. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, gently stroking the hatchling's head. "I'm going to do everything I can for you." The next several hours became a blur of desperate medical intervention. Sarah used every technique she knew, improvised new ones, and pushed herself beyond anything she had thought possible. She drew on medical knowledge from human space, draconian protocols, even experimental procedures she had only read about in theoretical journals. Scarith, meanwhile, worked with cold efficiency on her own patient. But Sarah could see that the Lost Clan healer was treating this as an academic exercise rather than a fight for a child's life. "The human is taking too long," Draconis observed as Sarah began what must have been her 10th different procedure. "Efficiency is crucial in medical practice. Sometimes," Zephyr said quietly from the observation area, "the most important things can't be rushed." The little dragon's words seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt them give her strength as she continued her desperate fight to save her tiny patient. It was well past midnight when Sarah finally stepped back from her patient. The little hatchling was breathing steadily, its vital signs stable, its injuries healing. Against all odds, she had managed to save a life that everyone had assumed was beyond help. Scarith had finished her work hours earlier. Her patient was alive, technically, but in a vegetative state that would likely prove permanent. "Impossible," Scarith said, staring at Sarah's patient. "Those injuries were designed to be fatal. No one should have been able to save that hatchling." "No one who views patients as puzzles instead of people," Sarah replied, exhaustion making her voice hoarse. Draconis was silent for a long moment, studying both patients. His expression was unreadable, but Sarah thought she detected something like surprise in his ancient eyes. "The challenges are complete," he announced finally. "The judges will now render their verdict." Commander Thoraxis spoke first. In terms of technical skill, both healers demonstrated exceptional competence. However, Nurse Chen's innovative techniques and successful treatment of the most challenging case clearly demonstrate superior ability. Draconis' expression darkened, but he nodded curtly. The human showed unexpected capability. Though I maintain that her emotional approach is inefficient, her results cannot be denied. All eyes turned to Zephyr, the final judge. The little dragon looked at both treatment areas, then at the patients who had been used in this terrible contest. "I have watched both healers work," Zephyr said, its young voice carrying surprising authority. "I have seen technical skill from both. But I have also seen something else." The little dragon paused, looking directly at Draconis. Vixen Scarith treated her patients like broken objects to be fixed. She showed no compassion, no gentleness, no recognition that these were living beings with thoughts and feelings. Her technique was good, but her heart was empty. Zephyr then turned to look at Sarah. Sarah treated her patients like people she cared about. She spoke to them, comforted them, fought for them even when it seemed hopeless. Her technique was also excellent, but more than that, she remembered that healing is about more than just fixing bodies. The little dragon's next words rang out like a bell in the silent medical bay. The greatest healer is not the one who can repair the most damage the fastest. The greatest healer is the one who can look at a suffering being and see not a problem to be solved, but a life to be cherished. Sarah Chun has proven that humans understand this truth better than you do. The silence that followed was profound. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks as she realized what Zephyr had done. The little dragon had not just declared her the winner of the challenge, but had articulated a philosophy of healing that went far beyond simple medical technique. Draconis stared at Zephyr for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than it had been all day. The hatchling speaks wisdom beyond its years, he admitted grudgingly. The challenge is decided in favor of the human. Sarah felt her knees nearly give out in relief. She had won. Against all odds, she had actually won. But Draconis wasn't finished. However, he continued, his voice growing harder again. A single challenge cannot undo millennia of certainty about the proper order of the galaxy. The human has proven herself skilled in one area, but this does not change the fundamental truth that some species are meant to rule while others serve. Sarah felt her heart sink. Even in victory, it seemed the lost clans would not change their ways. But then Zephyr did something that changed everything. The little dragon stepped forward, moving to stand between Sarah and the massive War Master. War Master Draconis, Zephyr said formally, I invoke the right of sacred truth. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every lost clan dragon in the room hissed and stepped backward. Even Draconis seemed shaken by the little dragon's words. You cannot, Draconis stammered. You are too young, too inexperienced. I'm a direct descendant of the Imperial line, Zephyr interrupted, and Sarah was amazed to hear the steel in the little dragon's voice. I carry the blood of the ancient emperors. By the laws you claim to follow, I have the right to speak sacred truth that cannot be denied or questioned. Draconis was silent, clearly struggling with the implications of what Zephyr had invoked. Speak your sacred truth, Imperial blood, he said finally, his voice heavy with reluctance. Zephyr stood straight, and for a moment, Sarah could see the Imperial dragon the little creature would someday become. The sacred truth is this, Zephyr announced, its voice carrying to every corner of the medical bay. You claim to follow the old ways, to honor the ancient traditions of our people. But you have forgotten the most ancient tradition of all, the duty of the strong to protect the weak, not exploit them. You have tortured children to make a point. You have caused suffering for your own amusement. You have forgotten that true strength lies not in the ability to dominate others, but in the wisdom to know when dominance is unnecessary. The little dragon paused, then continued with devastating simplicity. Sarah Chun, a human, has shown more honor than your entire clan. She risked her life to save mine. She dedicated herself to healing rather than harming. She treated your tortured victims with more compassion than you have shown to your own people. If this is what you call inferiority, then I prefer the company of inferiors to the society of your kind of superiority. The sacred truth hung in the air like a physical weight. By the ancient laws the lost clans claimed to follow, Zephyr's words could not be challenged or denied. They had to be accepted as absolute fact. Draconis stood in silence for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the implications of what he had just heard. Finally, he spoke. The sacred truth is heard and acknowledged, he said formally. The Imperial blood has spoken wisdom that cannot be denied. He turned to look at Sarah, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that might have been respect. Human, he said slowly, you have proven yourself worthy of consideration. Your skills in healing are impressive. Your dedication to life over death shows a wisdom we had not expected from your species. Sarah held her breath, waiting to see where this was leading. However, Draconis continued, one individual cannot represent an entire species. We will withdraw our demands for your surrender and the hatchling's punishment. But our judgment of humanity as a whole remains unchanged. It wasn't everything Sarah had hoped for, but it was more than she had dared to expect. With respect, War Master, she said carefully, perhaps individual judgment is where change begins. If you're willing to see one human as more than your preconception suggested, maybe other individuals could surprise you as well. Draconis considered this for a moment. Perhaps, he admitted, perhaps there is wisdom in observing before judging. It was a small concession, but Sarah recognized it as significant progress for someone who had been locked in ancient prejudices for millennia. We will depart this system, Draconis announced, but we will watch, and perhaps, in time, we will find reason to reconsider our position. As the Lost Clan delegation prepared to leave, Draconis paused beside Sarah one last time. Human, he said quietly, you have given us much to think about. That is unexpected. After they were gone, Sarah found herself alone in the medical bay with Zephyr, Lady Orleana, and Dr. Vorthak. The silence stretched for several minutes as everyone processed what had just happened. Did we just change 10,000 years of history? Dr. Vorthak asked finally. Maybe, Sarah replied, sinking into a chair as exhaustion finally caught up with her. Or maybe we just planted a seed that might grow into change someday. Zephyr padded over to her and climbed into her lap, snuggling against her like the child it still was despite its wise words. Thank you, the little dragon whispered, for everything. Sarah hugged Zephyr G.